In the first week of the legislative session, the Florida House passed out two major pieces of legislation off the floor today on COVID-19. Today's House passage of these measures is a victory both for Florida small businesses as well as Florida's seniors and Florida's consumers. The Florida House remains dedicated to protecting people, and we are achieving that exactly by shielding hardworking entrepreneurs from lawsuits that could put them and their business out of business. We're also stopping predatory behavior and scammers from tricking seniors into thinking they had to pay for vaccines and setting up fake websites. The first, House Bill 7, sponsored by Representative McClure, is a victory for small business. We will not let any business owner who is trying to do the right thing, who is operating their business and trying to protect their customers and trying to protect their employees, from having a frivolous lawsuit. Additionally, the Florida House remains steadfast in our mission to protect consumers from pandemic scammers. Our House Bill 9, carried by Representative Zika, sends a clear message that this ends here, that this ends now, and as more people in the state continue to be vaccinated, that they will be protected by this kind of fraudulent behavior. I applaud both Representative McClure and Representative Zika on the passage of their legislation and look forward to working with the Senate as well as the governor to make sure that they both get done. I'll take some questions in a moment, but first I want to recognize Representative Zika to talk a little bit about his bill.
Thank you, Speaker Sprowls, and good afternoon. What an honor today to have an important piece of legislation, the first one in the Florida House to pass, that sends a loud and clear message. The Florida House of Representatives will protect Florida consumers against fraud during a pandemic. And it's an honor to have this bill across the finish line, and I look forward to working with our partners in the Senate and make sure that this bill gets to the governor's desk as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. I do think it's kind of worth noting that there were several stories about these scammers across the state. One of them came out of Pasco County, where Representative Zika is from. So his bill today not only protects folks in Pasco County, but people throughout the state. With that, I'll answer any questions you have.
On the civil liability legislation, obviously Democrats' main concern is they say, this is blanket immunity. Can you imagine a scenario in which a lawsuit would be justified and allowed under this legislation? What would that look like?
Yeah, well first let's start with the premise of the question, which is it's blanket liability. It's just not true, right? If it was blanket liability, it would be a much shorter bill, right? It'd be one sentence long and provide blanket liability for businesses across the state. That's not what it does. What it acknowledges in the beginning of the bill is that this is a once-in-a-100-year global pandemic. The last time that the United States found themselves in this situation, anything comparable to this would have been 1918. So it acknowledges that in the beginning of the bill, and as a result says, look, there's great public necessity here, which is a standard that the Supreme Court would consider, that we need to protect businesses as a result of this situation. So we're going to create a process. Much of the discussion you heard today was about the process. There is no blanket immunity for businesses here. What we are doing is protecting folks from frivolous lawsuits. I think it's interesting, this came up on the floor, but some of our colleagues in the minority party mentioned, well, if I went to 10 businesses that day, how could I possibly know, how could the physician possibly know which business I got COVID in? Well, that is exactly the point. That is exactly why we are here. It is exactly why we're passing this bill off the floor in week 1 of the legislative session. Because of those 10 business owners, they don't know either. So why should they be dragged into court when they can't defend themselves against something? And look, will a judge ultimately dismiss that case? Probably. Will that person ultimately win if they can't prove those things? Probably. But what have you had to do in the meantime? Here you've been struggling during a pandemic. You own a small restaurant. You've been struggling. There's been a period of time where you've been shut down. There's a period of time where you can only do takeout. You're in a business that has small margins already. You've already had to lay off employees. Now you have to go out, hire a lawyer at $300 an hour to go defend a case against something where someone couldn't possibly know where they've gotten it. So that's who the people we're protecting. The people we're not protecting are the people who really engaged in terrible, grossly negligent conduct. And if they did, there's a process outlined in the bill for that person to have a cause of action at the courthouse.
Do you think that nursing homes can still be sued by patients or the families of patients who have been ill or died because of COVID?
Well, John, as you may know, this bill doesn't deal with healthcare liability. There's a bill moving in the House and in the Senate that deals specifically with healthcare liability, and nursing homes are included in that bill. But I've said from the very beginning, John, that you can't treat the small restaurant that does coal-fired pizza the same as you do a healthcare entity. where individuals are trained, they have a knowledge about these things, they're following medical standards and medical protocols. They are not similarly situated to the pizza owner of the restaurant. So we have said from the very beginning, that is why we are going to split these two things. On the one hand, we're going to have business liability for the pizza place and the laundromat and for the hardware store. And then on the other one, we're going to deal with healthcare institutions, hospitals, nursing homes, doctor's offices. So that's why we have two bills. I certainly think the business liability bill is easier to deal with, which is why we're dealing with it on week one. Sure.
Does that, I mean, would that weigh in on your decision whether this bill is necessary or it's too early?
The amount of cases?
Yeah, there's, ACA saying there are no
Sure.
cases actually filed. They haven't hit that threshold. They're all in pre-suit, so.
Yeah, as you know, and I know you know this, Eric, but particularly in medical cases that are going to deal with medical malpractice, that's going to be a lot more of a rigorous process than, hey, I was walking, down the aisle and there was, vegetable oil and I slipped and fell, right? So that's a harder process to go through. There's expert witnesses, there's doctors, there's things like that. So no, it wouldn't impact my belief in whether or not we need to do healthcare liability. I think we need to do healthcare liability. I also think, and I think Representative McClure did a really excellent job of articulating this today, better than I'm probably going to, which was to say both of these bills, but I want to talk about business liability since that's the one we passed today. In the business liability bill, this isn't just about the number of cases. If each one of us left here and went to our favorite, small mom and pop restaurant or to our small business and said, hey, are you all concerned about liability? I'd be shocked if they didn't say yes. I'd be shocked. So they are worried about it. So what we need from our business owners is to lean back into commerce, to realize that if they're just trying to do the right thing, that they're going to be protected, which is what we did.
What are the prospects this session in the House for a sports betting bill and for a gaming compact here in Sprowls?
Look, I'm in the same place I've always been, which is I said, we've talked about gaming every year in the legislature, whether it's informally or formally. I'm always going to entertain if there's a potential for a compact. To date, there hasn't been, a situation in the time I've been here to do that. So I'm open-minded, but we'll have to see what happens. That there's a major legislation that passed this week?
Do you recall an occasion when such a major piece of legislation passed in the first week, and what does that tell us about?
Yeah, well, look, I think that, I think that's dependent on who you ask, probably. Look, I think that obviously this is a significant piece of legislation, but we also, I think what it underscores really is the need. It underscores the severity of the situation, which is we're trying to get Florida back on her feet. And in order to do that, we need businesses to thrive. And look, they've done this, and I may have shared this with you all, but I think it's worth noting again. Prior to the lockdown that we had, which of course was much briefer than a lot of other states, but prior to that, in my hometown in Pinellas County, the sheriff sent out a bunch of deputies to small businesses and big businesses, just to kind of do a check to help educate them on what CDC guidelines or local DOH guidelines were to protect customers, protect employees. And they found something like 98%. They did 4,500 businesses. 98% were in compliance. I think that just shows you, this is a long time ago. This isn't yesterday. This is the beginning of this thing for these businesses. Businesses want to protect, of course, themselves and their employees and their customers. And that this premise of this bill is based on that premise, which the vast majority of people are good actors and want to do the right thing. And if they do, given the nature of this situation, we should be providing them every reasonable protection. Well, look, that hasn't been told to me, so we'll see how that goes. Right now, we've obviously sent them our business liability bill. We have our health care bill moving. They have their business and their health care bill moving, so we'll see where we're at.
About the THC caps, yesterday, medical marijuana rates talked about 31 petitions, 31,000 signatures showing an opposition to the caps that have a question right now. Do you have a response to the 31 signatures?
Listen, we always appreciate feedback regardless of who it's from. This is a question about science, and the healthcare committee is asking a question about science. Everyone talks about how we want to take science and data and real information into account. That's all we're doing.
Based on the minimum wage amendment that passed in November, President Simpson said he wants state employees to get a raise. He's asking for $40 million.
Yeah, that's a budget question. It's a budget question, and obviously we have to take into account the entire budget. We've over the last several years, including last year, right? We've looked at that. Last year we did a pay raise for state employees. We did a pay raise obviously separately for school teachers, starting teachers. So we've always been looking at that. We've also did a pay raise recently for corrections workers because we're having a problem recruiting corrections workers. So we'll consider that during the budget cycle.
Legislation making its way through the House and the Senate that would create a parent's Bill of Rights. Senator Brand has tacked on something to the Senate version of the bill that would forbid police agencies from requesting grades from local school districts in response to some of my papers reporting on Pasco County Sheriff's Office. I was wondering, do you support that addition? Do you think that parents should have to sign off before police agencies to get grades?
Well, I'm not sure it's based on a correct premise, considering the Pasco County Sheriff's Office disputes what the Tampa Bay Times has written about that, including that they didn't ask for grades.
Speaker, HB1 has obviously moved very quickly through the House. It hasn't even been scheduled for a hearing in the Senate. Do you understand, or maybe can you give us some insight as to what might be going on there?
I think it's early. I think that people try to usually make too much of all these things very, very early. I think that the Senate President has said to you all numerous times that he supports the legislation. We all stood together, so I'm optimistic. I'm working with our partners in the Senate and the governor to get the bill done.
The governor has stated the state made some allusions to trying to limit the authority of local governments to issue emergency orders, any kind of restrictions. So I think it's aimed at the mask ordinances that so many times have done. He doesn't really have no specific legislation that I know of right now, but I wonder what your thoughts on that idea of limiting the authority of local governments.
I think when it comes to all of the things that were done during the course of the pandemic, that's what Chair Leaks Committee, the Pandemic and Public Emergency Committee, is looking at that, and the idea is to treat that similarly, John, to how we've treated the committees we've set up in the wake of hurricanes, which is really to look at it in its totality and figure out what recommendations they have for the members. So I'm optimistic to see what those are. Thank you all very much.